button. Hitting the big blue button. Please start the preview player to accurately sync your stream. Okay. Start streaming. And we are live. Thank you guys for coming, and thank you, Chris Shelton, for coming on to discuss this with me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me. I hardly ever get to talk Star Wars to the big wide public, so this will be fun.
It will be fun. So, as a lot of people have guessed by the title of the video, hang on, let me just pause this. As many people have guessed by the title of the video, this is going to be a debate between me and Chris Shelton on whether or not the Jedi Order is a cult. So I came out with a video recently calling the Jedi Order a cult, and I got a little bit of pushback from Chris on this. So figured we'd discuss it. Now, let me just lay out some points here that I have. If we go by the byte model, which is a standard model that we use to determine if something is a cult or not, right? Now, there are other models, but I've been using this one personally, and this is the one that I used for the Jedi Order. If you go down the list, you see things like an us versus them, good versus evil, black versus white mentality. Let's see, they control your clothing and hairstyle, things like that. And I feel like it met a lot of the points on the byte model to qualify as a cult. What do you think about it?
I think that you're right that it does, from the surface or from the outside, it appears that there are definitely cult characteristics, but I don't think that the Jedi Order is a destructive cult by the full model.
Okay. So what's your what is the difference to you between a destructive cult and just a regular cult?
Okay, I'm glad you asked because that's actually a really, really important point. Cults are any group that meets the definition according to the dictionary, right? Tight group knit of people, aligned around a common cause, generally very, very, um, almost maybe fanatical even, but certainly like all in, strongly held beliefs. So that's a cult. A cult can be a good thing, a cult can be a bad thing. It depends on context, of course. A destructive cult's always bad. It always is producing more destruction than it is creation. It's always pushing into the extremes. It's dialing things up to 11. It's that, and that's where I draw a pretty clear line, which is why I try to take care to say destructive cult rather than just use the word cult.
Okay, fair enough. On that note, then, let me present this idea to you, this
Yep.
proposition. I claim that the Jedi Order is a cult because it is a destructive cult because the members
Mm-hmm.
are very what's the word I'm looking for? They're very loyal. They're very extreme in a lot of their methodology and a lot of their thinking. They believe that they change their clothing and hairstyle to fit into this specific mold. They can't associate with certain types of people, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Mm-hmm.
think about
There's
it?
de- yeah, agree. There is controlling behavior. There is certainly levels of indoctrination. You certainly have an aesthetic or stoic lifestyle is what it's been compared to. You get into a little bit of this if you go on the Wikipedia page about Jedi Knights, which
Right.
I did earlier today to sort of see what was there. So you get like it's kind of in the stoic model. There's certainly a strict moral code. So there are rules and regulations that are prohibiting to certain behavior. But um, there's an aspect that I think is missing, and we can get into that as we go here. But I definitely agree with you that from the outside looking in, or I guess really from any point of view, you are dealing with a strict, controlling, indoctrinating group of people. And I think that those same standards could be applied to the military or to Catholic monks. or Hindu or Buddhist monks for that matter. And you see a very regimented, very controlled lifestyle. The question becomes, is it so regimented and so extreme that it becomes destructive? And that's where I would
Okay.
say, yeah.
That's fair enough. So you would say it is a cult, but not necessarily destructive cult, and that's really the defining feature here.
Exactly.
So would you call the Sith a destructive cult?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
And one might think, same, but I will point out that the dark side over a long period of time, according to everything I've seen and read, and I'm only sticking, I think we mentioned before that we're only sticking with really
Right.
movie lore here. We're not going extended universe. So I'm not paying any attention to the novels of Plagueis and all of that.
Right.
None of that is applicable here. Just by the movies, the dark side has an abusive, destructive effect on its user over a long period of time. Their mind literally twists and turns into, it goes to very, very dark, evil, horrible places. And that's kind of the nature of the dark side when you go too far along with that. So that's why I would say that you do have a destructive cult situation, even though there's only two of them. In fact, it's a great example of how you have a very tiny destructive cult with only two folks, two people.
Right. I figure it seems to me like just looking at the whole situation from the outside, it feels like it's a really good example of the influence continuum, which I'm sure you know of. For the
Mhm.
audience who may not know of the influence continuum, anyways, it's this thing that I think it was written by Stephen Hassan, and he basically defines the difference between destructive influence and constructive influence. If you're encouraging things like free will and personal choice, as opposed to obedience and dependency and things like that, then you're constructive. If you do encourage obedience and dependency, then it's destructive. So I guess the Sith are kind of more on the destructive side of the influence continuum, and the Jedi are on the constructive side. But when you think about it, the Jedi aren't entirely constructive. Like, they don't want their people to go down these certain paths of thinking. So I would argue that there is a destructive nature to the Jedi, right?
Yes, I agree with that. I totally see where you're going with that, and I agree because some of the limitations that are made on Jedi are interesting. You can see how they would be a traditional sort of thing, maybe along the same lines as analogous to monastic guidelines or orders, right? Like no sex, no reproduction.
Right.
Excuse me. You're supposed to be dedicating your life to a noble, pure cause, which is a higher calling than uh, than child rearing, family making, being part
Right.
of the species, right? It's a higher calling. Here's the funny thing though, is in the Star Wars milieu, the Force is real.
Right.
And your higher calling is true. In our world, we
Right.
it's a lot of debate possible over whether what Catholic monks are giving up, or whether what Opus Dei does, or these going to
Right.
these extremes, or even the Buddhist monks and Hindus and the self-flagellation we've seen over the centuries. That could all be for naught. you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
There's a very definite return on investment in the Star Wars universe, and I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's an important point for the sacrifices Jedi made.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm gonna give you a little bit of pushback on this one.
Yeah.
I think that whether it's true or not, the behaviors and mentalities that they program into people are still destructive in their own right.
hmm
Jehovah's Witnesses claim to have the truth, but I wouldn't say that it's justified, even if they did have the truth, the things that they do to the people, for example. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. I
So
would agree with
there's that factor, and also
you. Yes.
there was somebody, Bionic Dance. She actually did a whole big response video to me about this, and I intended
Oh.
to respond to her. I've not responded to it yet, but we'll see. Anyway, her argument was basically, Jedi, the Force is real, so you've got people running around with like psychic powers that could literally just kill people at any moment. So you need the discipline, and you need to give them discipline to teach them how to use it. So you don't have people running around just all willy-nilly, just crushing things with their minds, right? But and that's a fair argument, but I still
It is a
kind
good
of
point.
I feel like, again, if it's true or not is irrelevant. I feel like if it's going, like, if they're using these tactics and programming in these behaviors and these mentalities, it's still wrong to some extent, right? And not just that, but they've got kids. Like, how early do they bring kids in? If we're taking episode 1, 2, and 3, they get them as like young as like 5, right?
No, that's very true. The Padawans start very, very young. They rejected Anakin because he was too old. Luke Skywalker, of course, was way too goddamn old, but Yoda
Yeah.
took him anyway because he was literally the last hope.
Right.
At least he was, there in flesh and blood. They didn't have Leia on their hands, so
Right.
yeah, it was, yeah. There's something to be said there. I, of course, have gone on record many times as saying that religious indoctrination of children is paramount to child abuse because
Right.
children have no critical thinking skills with which to judge this information. But I have to also fall back on what I said before, though, because the Force is real and it's true. And without discipline, it could actually be itself a destructive influence on an undisciplined mind. I think there might be something to that. It's not exactly the same thing as the one power from, the Wheel of Time series or
Right.
something where it's going to make you go insane. But I think there might be something to a force aware person, having to jump through some hoops in order to figure out how to actually utilize this power.
Okay, well, let me see if maybe we can meet in the middle on this then.
Yeah.
What would you say to my suggestion of either making it like a voluntary thing that you get to go through this if you choose to, or swear off your powers, one or the other, or dumbing down a little bit on like the control and the influence and the discipline that they give to people, because it really seems to me like they're way over the top and pretty extreme with their philosophies and their ideas and their training and things like that. What do you think?
I think that there is room for change. Yes, I will definitely say that on the side of the Jedi. I have said when I did my last podcast on this, I was talking to a guy and we talked about what that whole prophecy was about with returning balance to the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And my big guess or my big thing on that was that that an ideal Force adept person would actually be able to draw equally from both sides
Mm.
and be in a position to judge and know when was the appropriate mode of behavior, because you don't want to go too far down the dark side. That goes crazy hate and rage and all of that. You don't want to become a rage monster. I mean, imagine the Incredible Hulk with the Force,
Oh,
right?
right.
uh, but on the other hand, you can go so far the other way that you become blind to your own biases, and I think that's where the Jedi went. um, Maybe the morality point here might help with this. um, it was brought up, and I would not have known about this actually until today when I was kind of doing a little bit of research.
Mm.
This master slave morality
Mm.
thing. Have you heard of
I
this?
have not. Tell me about it.
I hadn't either. It's actually, there's a Wikipedia page. It's a central theme of Nietzsche's work, apparently, and it's
Mm.
mentioned in whoever wrote the Wikipedia pages for Jedi and Sith made mention of this, that the
Oh.
Jedi follow a slave morality and that's not a bad thing. I'll show you. While the Sith follow a master morality. And what it says in just the opening paragraph of the Wikipedia page is that Nietzsche argued that there were two fundamental types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality values pride and power, while slave morality values kindness, empathy, and sympathy. Master morality judges actions as good or bad, unlike slave morality, which judges by a scale of good or evil intentions.
That is so fascinating. I don't know how I've not
Right?
heard of this. You know, honestly, I've read one of Nietzsche's books, and it was almost like word salad. It was like really difficult
Yeah.
to get through.
Yeah.
Maybe I
Well,
should give him a little more credit, honestly.
yeah, I had to have it dumbed down for me because,
Yeah,
reading German philosophers is,
it's a bit much, right?
yeah, it really is. But I found this quite interesting, and looking at the two, I saw that this for me was the place where I could draw that destructive line. Um, but again, like for example, you have this play out in so many different ways. The Sith, for example, will just kill anybody, anytime, for any reason, and they just don't care if it forwards
Right.
their goals or intentions. That's obviously power and pride are where they live, right?
Hmm.
The Jedi won't do that. They're all about justice. They don't, they're. I'm going to contradict myself here, but in the opening movies where we're seeing how the Jedi have gone too far,
Hmm.
you see examples where they just sort of act rather bad Clint Eastwoodish, like
Yeah.
they just kind of go in and roll in, and whatever
Do
they
what they
want to
need
do,
to
they
do.
feel entitled to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they could dial it down a bit,
Okay.
but their hearts are in the right place. They're not out to try to abuse the galaxy.
Okay. Yeah, that's a fair
Yeah.
point. I can see where you're coming from with that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know that it makes it right, though. I'm going to give you a little bit more pushback on
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah,
Their
yeah,
hearts may
yeah,
be in the right place, but with
yeah,
with morality generally, I would say that um, intentions aren't everything. Sometimes it's the effect that matters,
for sure.
and I would say with the Jedi, I feel like they lean a little bit more on the destructive side.
Yeah, fair enough. From a very God, dare I say, well, no, I'm not even going to go that far out there. I'll just say, if you start moving down the spectrum towards, say, a more free will libertarian society,
Sure.
then they assault all realities, right? It's a morality that has its roots in knights,
Mm.
middle European history, that kind of law enforcement. You didn't have a town police force.
Right.
Maybe you had some sheriffs around, but I think they came after the fact of knights. I think knights were the guys who were running around enforcing the king's will. So the whole basis of the morality really depends on who's at the top
Right.
directing what to do, right? Because the Jedi were not autonomous. They were more of again, I'm drawing from what I was reading today, they're more of a Praetorian Guard function. They really are tied into the Republic.
Political structure.
Yeah, they're not separate from. And if they were separate wholly from, um, some of their powers would be concerning, would be very problematic.
Mm.
But because they're enfolded into the Republican system and they do answer to someone else, whereas the Sith, of course, answer to no one but themselves, um, I think there's some degree of rein pulling that can occur with the Jedi, right? But again, as we saw in the first three movies, when we're seeing how out of control they've gotten, they've gone too far,
Sure.
and of course they're serving an evil master, and they're so caught up in their own biases that they can't see that,
Sure.
and that was where they really lose the whole plot,
That makes
so
sense.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so we'll say that in the universe that they live in,
yeah,
they're on point. But if
yeah.
they were to live in our world with our morality, it would not be good.
No, a bunch of guys running around with lightsabers like hacking
That's
off
true.
people's arms,
That's fair
no
enough.
way.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, no
So
way.
I understand you have you have like another model. Like of course a lot of people know I've
Yes.
been using the bite model by Stephen Hassan. What is your model that you use? Not your model, but well, your model if you want. But what models do you use?
Well, I use two basically, and both of them are informed by Steve Hassan's BITE model. So it's not entirely divorced, right? The thing about models is there are lots of them. And there's lots of ways to look at relationships or sociologically look at groups and how leaders and followers and the dynamics of that. And there's lots and lots and lots of studies and fascinating information about it. Early on, I hit on a checklist,
Mm-hmm.
characteristics associated with cultic groups. And I've got it in here. I liked it so much, I posted it on my blog.
Mm.
It's where I'm reading it from here. And this comes from doctors Janja Lalich and Michael Langone. And Michael Langone is now, I believe, or recently was the president of the International Cultic Studies Association. Janja Lalich's PhD in sociology, and she's been all over this stuff for
Mm.
years and years and years. And here are some of the points. Then they say, look, this is not a fully diagnostic checklist. It's not like check, 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 well,
Right.
destructive cult, right? You got to use judgment. There is no such thing as a rote way of looking at any group or any situation and saying, okay, they dress in uniforms, they march in order, and they don't eat lunch, so therefore they're a destructive cult, right? It
Right.
doesn't quite work that way. But here are some of the characteristics, and some of these are also where I, in looking at it from this point of view, went, Jedi, I don't think so. And here's, like, for example, the group displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader, and whether he is alive or dead, regards his belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth, as law.
Okay.
So with the Jedi, you certainly have commitment, but you noticed all through the movies, it was never unquestioning commitment. They were
Mm.
always asking questions, right? They were
Right.
never slapped out of line for asking questions. So, that's a point.
Although I do want
Oh,
to touch on that one point.
yes,
Qui-Gon, I think, contradicted the council, and as a result, was not allowed to be a council member. So there are consequences in the form of not being allowed to move up, at least. But
absolutely. Absolutely. And okay, another point is oh, and this is actually a pretty important one, is mind altering practices such as meditation, chanting,
mm-hmm.
speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, debilitating work routines. These are all used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leaders.
Okay.
Right? Oh, you're having questions, brother Joe? Well, go do some gardening for the rest of the afternoon and
Right.
contemplate the error of your ways, right? Again, you'll see some of this used to, in any group, you'll have
Right.
this used to a certain extent, but when it's used in excess, again, that's a very important part of this, right? And we're talking about mind altering techniques. The Star Wars universe doesn't really get into this kind of stuff too heavily, but that could be a thing. Now, here, of course, we have a characteristic that the Jedi do meet. The group is elitist, claiming a special exalted status for itself, its leaders, and members.
That's
So
true.
that's definitely there, right? Um, Now, I'm curious what you're going to think on this one.
Okay.
The group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. Now, they certainly have an elite status, but would you think the Jedi are us versus them towards the society at large?
Versus the Sith specifically.
Versus the Sith, yeah, but the society that they protect.
Okay, so this is getting a little bit
Mhm.
complicated. Obviously,
Oh,
they
okay.
obviously they have the us versus them situation with the Sith, but as far as wider society goes, I guess there's honest reason to fight with the Sith on this because they literally just want to kill you. Like they're basically psychotic, right? Their minds have disintegrated. So I guess I can forgive them their anger and kind of, you know, their standoffishness with the Sith, but as far as wider society goes, I guess that they're more interested in protecting the society than attacking them.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, they could be accused of having a sort of a too much of a parental attitude or
Mm-hmm.
something towards society. But I don't, you know, like they're sort of maybe in some respects they're, you know, helicopter Jedi or something,
Right, right. Yeah.
helicopter parents, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's us versus them, and that's a really really crucial
Okay.
point of indoctrination.
All right, I will concede that point because that's actually something I talked about in the video. There's reason for them being standoffish with the Sith, and I guess
Hmm.
they're not really standoffish with the people. So,
Exactly. And then, okay, another point of a destructive cult, very important one, is the leader is not accountable to any authorities, right? The head guy, L. Ron Hubbard, whoever it is, like he's the rule maker. He's not the one who
and
has
it's
to follow
over.
rules.
Right.
That's right. Right. Nobody. He's not answering to anybody. At the end of the day, the Jedi are answering to the
However,
Republic.
think about this one, okay?
Yeah.
There's the Jedi Council, and
Yes.
the Jedi Council basically makes all the rules and things like that. It's similar
Yes.
to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
I do see that. And there's a lot of power there. In fact, probably too much. Excuse me. But they do at the end of the day answer to a higher command, I guess I'll say. And so that alone really knocks them down a few pegs as
Okay.
far as how far can they go.
All right, that's fair enough.
Cool. And let's do one more.
Okay.
There's a whole list of them, and you can find this on my blog, or you can find this in the book Take Back
I'll
Your
drop
Life:
some
Uncovering
links
Cults.
in the
Yeah,
description too.
cool. Um, oh yeah, okay. Now this is actually one, right? The group is preoccupied with bringing in new members.
Mm,
Now, any group brings in new members, but destructive cults, they're usually kind of small, right? Not always by any stretch of the imagination. The Mormons are huge, the JWs are huge, and yet they're constantly
yeah.
proselytizing, constantly sending out missions, constantly sending out tracts and sitting out the street corners and, you know, holding out the watchtowers and all the
Right.
stuff that these guys are doing all the time. The Jedi don't do that, right? It's like they're not actively out there seeking new members. It's almost an accident when they run across them, like Qui-Gon with Anakin. You know, oh my God, this midi-chlorian count, right? If he
Right.
hadn't literally ran into him, none of that ever would have happened. So they're not, and in fact, I think in a way this is a bug for the Jedi, not in terms of them being a cult, but in terms of their, you know, if the guys can't reproduce, if none of them can
Right.
reproduce,
Can't get married or anything, right?
yeah, and the force comes from midi-chlorians, you'd think that genetically they would want these guys
Right.
reproducing so they're future lines of Jedi, but they're so unconcerned about it, they don't even go there in that direction.
That's
So those are
something to
some of the
think about.
characteristics.
Okay. Well, let
Yeah,
me
exactly.
let me throw this at you.
Yeah.
They bring Padawan learners in really, really young, like
Yes.
5 or 6 years old. I'm wondering if it's like they get the parents' consent. Do they get the kids' consent? It can't be informed consent, right?
Well, that's a good question. They certainly didn't give a lot of informed consent, particularly to what was his Anakin's mom, right?
Right, right.
Whatever
Shmi.
her name was, Shmi. That's it. Yeah. I mean, you. I was going to say earlier that I thought there was more informed consent than not, but maybe not. You know, that
Hmm.
actually might be a thing. There is definitely indoctrination going on there, and I think that if I was going to point to anything with the Jedi that most disturbs me, it would be I would want to see, you know, in that indoctrination, are they really giving the other side a fair shake? Not that they want to push people off to the dark side, but are they really explaining why this exists, what it's all
Or are
about?
they
Or is
shutting
it
it down?
always just, yeah, shut down, dark side, bad, horrible, stop? You know, and that's where the extremism of the frame of mind comes in, and that's the bug I see in the Jedi Order
Okay,
that
that's
leads
that's
to the
fair enough.
arrogance. You
Yeah.
know, yeah.
All right.
I think
Well,
that's where they.
to kind of piggyback on what you're saying on that point, they do kind of practice thought stopping techniques and things like that, right? I mean, they're pretty
Yeah,
heavy on
they
that.
do.
So that's another point
Yeah,
against them, I would say. Okay. Well, I'll tell you
yeah.
what. Why don't we give our final determinations? Would you say what would you say about what are your closing statements about the Jedi?
My closing statements would be that they are a force for good with clearly good intentions and good actions to back up those intentions. In fact, putting their lives on the line literally every day.
Mm,
You know, a Jedi wakes up in the morning, he has absolutely no certainty that his head's going to be hitting the pillow that night,
mm,
given the nature of their life. And most of the time, those deaths would be resulting from I'm sure there's accidents and all that that happens to them, but mostly it's going to be from enforcing the king's will or whatever, and that's going to be tempered by their code of conduct, which clearly states that they are a force for good to support the weak and not the strong. So everything in their essence or their core of being, even if it is indoctrinated and there are thought stopping cliches there, at least it's a force for good. And I think that says a lot because the other thing that I've developed about cults, and I've gotten nothing but agreement on this, but I've never really heard it said this way anywhere else, is that it's an abusive relationship
mm-hmm.
between the leader and the followers, right? And I don't see an abusive relationship within the Jedi as such. Nothing that the Jedi, either learner or Jedi Knight, is not agreeing to. If a Jedi Knight wants to leave, he can leave. And that is really at the end of the day probably my most make break point on whether something's a destructive cult or not is what do they try to do when you leave.
Okay. Yeah, that's
So
fair enough. I
yeah.
think I can agree with you mostly on that. And I think that you and I both agree that they could stand to dial it back just a little bit, right?
Yes, they
Dial it
definitely
back a
could.
little. Um,
Absolutely.
they have some concerning behaviors, some concerning ideas and ideologies, and I would be a little bit worried about where we would find the Jedi Order if they were allowed to survive unchecked for, 2, 3, 4,000 years or something like that. I'd be a little concerned about it. So that would be my closing thoughts on it. Before we get off the air, where can people find you and your stuff? You have a YouTube channel, right?
Yes, you can look me up on YouTube under Chris Shelton. That's the name of my channel, and I'm not the baseball player, and I'm certainly not the Qigong healer that also goes by Chris Shelton.
Mm.
So you can find me there, Critical Thinker at Large. You can find me at my blog, which is mncriticalthinking.com, and you can find my book, Scientology A to Xenu, on Amazon if you're interested in finding out more about that.
Very cool. Well, thank you for coming on and discussing this. It's been really fascinating and interesting chat, and I will talk to you again next time, okay?
Awesome, man. Thanks.
All right.